Waitress gets ridiculed because of the scar on her face. Then a millionaire appears and changes her life. The diner was already full when Elena tied her apron and stepped behind the counter. Manhattan mornings were like that, loud, rushed, indifferent. The sizzling of bacon, the clatter of dishes, the hum of small talk filled the space. She moved through it like second nature, balancing plates in one hand and coffee pots in the other. No one noticed how skillfully she avoided the spotlight. Or maybe they did. Maybe it was the scar. A thin, pale line trailed from her left temple to just above her cheekbone, softened with time but unmistakable. A permanent souvenir from the day she'd yanked her little brother out of a burning car and took the brunt of the shattering glass herself. 12 years old and braver than most grown men, but the world did not see bravery. The world saw imperfection. At booth 3, a group of impeccably dressed young professionals were already half a mimosa deep into their Friday brunch. Their suits were tailored, their shoes polished, and their laughter carried a bite. As Elena approached with their order, one of them leaned toward his friend and muttered, loud enough for her to hear, "Well, that's one way to kill your appetite." The friend snorted. What happened? She fall face first into a blender? Their laughter spilled into the room like grease smoke. Elena said nothing. She placed the plates gently in front of them, her hands steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "Oh, come on," another added. "You think a place with decent omelets could spring for staff that didn't double as Halloween extras?" One of them reached for his coffee, glancing at her with a smirk. "Hey, sweetheart, ever consider a job at a haunted house? You'd kill it." Elena paused. Her jaw tightened. She could feel every eye in the room flicker between their table and her back. She turned slowly, locking eyes with the man who had just spoken. "Is there anything else you need, sir?" she asked, her voice even. He blinked, caught off guard for a moment. "Yeah, maybe a little makeup. Or a curtain." She didn't flinch. She didn't break. She just nodded once, turned, and walked away. Across the diner, at a quiet corner table, a man had been watching the entire exchange. He was dressed neatly, though not showily. Dark blazer, open-collar shirt, and a leather-bound notebook beside his half-finished coffee. His name was Julian, and unlike most who had seen the scene, he didn't look away out of discomfort. He leaned forward, his gaze following Elena as she returned to the counter and resumed her work, as if nothing had happened. Later, when the group of men finally left with a careless tip and louder laughter, Julian motioned for the check. Elena brought it over with practiced calm. "Thank you," she said simply. He looked up. "No," he replied, "thank you." She tilted her head, confused. "For handling that with more grace than they deserved," Julian said. "Most people would have walked out or thrown a pot of coffee in their faces." Elena managed a small smile. "Tempting." Julian smiled back, then added softly, "It's strange, isn't it? How some people think they're seeing a flaw, when really, they're just too small to understand the shape of strength." Elena blinked. No one had ever said anything like that to her, not without pity, not with quiet admiration. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked at him fully for the first time. His eyes were calm, serious. There was no trace of condescension or curiosity, just presence. "Julian," he said, extending his hand. "Elena," she shook it. He nodded. "It's good to meet you, Elena." And for a moment, brief and silent, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. Not despite the scar, but maybe, just maybe, with it. It had been 3 days since the cruel laughter at booth 3 had pierced through the hum of clinking dishes and clattering mugs. Elena had tried to let it go, bury it beneath orders and hours on her feet, but cruelty had a way of echoing longer than kindness ever did. Wednesday morning was quiet. The breakfast rush had trickled out, leaving only the soft hiss of the espresso machine and the low murmur of local radio playing old jazz tunes. Elena was wiping down the counter when she saw him, Julian, slip into the back booth again. Same seat near the window, the one that caught just enough light to feel like a corner of its own world. He did not call her. He simply waited, his gaze gentle and patient, as if he understood that the space between moments was worth something. Elena approached, towel slung over her shoulder. "You again?" she asked, keeping her tone somewhere between teasing and wary. Julian gave her a soft smile. I figured it was safe. I don't see any blender jokes flying around today. She snorted. A reluctant sound. We saved those for Saturdays. He nodded. Then I picked the right day. Julian ordered just a black coffee and a slice of apple pie. That's it? Elena arched an eyebrow. Just that, he said, settling into the seat like he planned to stay. I come for the pie. She didn't reply, but when she returned a few minutes later with the order, he looked at the slice like it was a memory. My mother used to make pie like this, he said, eyes softening. Not perfect, a little messy, the kind of crust that never quite held its shape but always tasted like safety. Something in Elena stilled. Her hand lingered on the plate just a second longer before she set it down. She passed away? She asked before she could stop herself. Julian nodded, years ago. But this, it tastes like hers. Elena blinked. I baked that one, Julian smiled. That explains everything. From that day on, he became a fixture, always arriving during the lull between breakfast and lunch, always sitting in Elena's section. Sometimes he brought a book, sometimes he simply sat and looked out the window, as if watching the world try to remember how to be kind. And each time, he left a tip, large, purposeful, always neatly folded under his plate, and each time Elena gave it back. On his fourth visit, she found the usual envelope, 2 crisp 20s nestled beneath his empty plate. She stormed over to his booth. Mr. Cross, she said, dropping the money on the table. I told you, I'm not taking this. He looked up from his coffee, unbothered. It's Julian, and it's not about taking. It's a thank you. Then say thank you. I just did. With your wallet, she said. Her voice was steady, but her arms were crossed so tightly her knuckles went white. You think people like me want your pity? Julian's brow furrowed. It's not pity. I've been stared at enough to know the difference. The words landed harder than she expected. Around them the cafe seemed to still. Julian leaned forward, his tone calm but clear. A tip is gratitude, not charity. If I pitied you, I would have walked out the second I saw your scar. But I didn't. I stayed. Because the pie tasted like home. Because your service had grace. And because there was something about you that made the world feel softer. Elena stared at him, heart knocking hard in her chest. She didn't know whether to slap him or thank him. After a pause, she said quietly, You make a good argument. I usually do, he replied, sipping his coffee. She hesitated. Then, before she could change her mind, she slid into the booth across from him. You don't look like someone who eats in diners like this, she said. I don't, he admitted. But lately, I'm trying to make time for things that feel real. She tilted her head. And this feels real? Julian met her gaze, unwavering. You do. The words weren't flirtatious. They weren't laced with drama, just simple, honest. And they landed like a whisper in a quiet room. Elena stood quickly, the moment catching her off guard. I'll get you another coffee, she muttered, retreating toward the counter. As she passed the steel pitcher, she caught her reflection, braid loose, scar visible. And yet, for the first time in a long time, it wasn't the scar she saw first. Maybe, just maybe, someone was finally seeing her whole. The following week brought with it a streak of rain. Outside the diner, puddles stretched like little lakes across the sidewalks, and umbrellas bloomed in clusters at crosswalks. Inside, the warm scent of coffee and grilled bread made the storm feel far away. Elena wiped down a booth near the window, her mind already drifting before she saw him. Again. Julian. He was already seated in his usual corner, a book open in front of him, untouched pie beside his coffee. He looked up, gave her that small, quiet smile. You're back, she said, pretending not to smile. Wasn't planning on skipping, he replied. She refilled his coffee without asking. Still reading that one? Some stories are worth rereading, Julian said, glancing at her. Elena's cheeks flushed lightly. You always talk like that. Only when I mean it. They settled into a rhythm over the days that followed. Julian asked questions. Real questions, not filler. He asked about her favorite authors, what music she listened to when the diner closed, what food she missed from childhood. She always answered cautiously, but his patience wore down her hesitation, one story at a time. One quiet afternoon, when the crowd had thinned and a soft jazz tune drifted through the speakers, Julian surprised her with a simple question. "Can I ask about the scar?" Elena froze. He saw it immediately. "You don't have to answer, just, when you're ready." She stood still for a long moment. Then she sat down across from him, folding her hands on the table like someone preparing for surgery. "I was 12, she began. "My dad was driving. My little brother was in the back seat. We were coming home from a camping trip, rainy road, slick tires. A truck swerved into our lane. We hit a ditch and flipped." Julian's expression sobered. "God." "Dad was knocked out. My brother was trapped under a seatbelt that jammed. The car started to smoke. I didn't think. I just climbed over glass, pulled him out through the back window. A piece of the frame tore through my face." Julian didn't speak. He let the weight of her words sit. "I saved my brother," she continued. "But after that, everything changed. At school, people looked at me differently, like I was something tragic or scary. My best friend stopped sitting next to me. One teacher asked if I wanted to sit in the back so I'd be more comfortable. I dropped out in sophomore year." "Because of them?" Julian asked, incredulous. Elena shrugged. "I was tired of pretending it didn't hurt, of walking into rooms where people saw the scar before they saw me." Julian's hands curled into gentle fists. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said. "I found work. I took care of my brother when our dad left. We survived." There was a new tone in her voice now, not bitterness, not pride, just quiet survival. Julian reached for his cup. "You're stronger than anyone I know." Elena didn't answer. She just nodded and stood up, leaving him to his coffee. Later that evening, on her way to grab lunch from the corner bodega, Elena saw him again, but not at the diner. Across the street, an elderly woman was standing near the edge of the curb, a cart of groceries too heavy to lift. Rain drizzled on her scarf, and she was clearly overwhelmed. Julian, coat unbuttoned, walked up beside her, spoke gently, and picked up her cart. He didn't look for thanks, didn't wait for anyone to notice. He walked her across the street, helped her into a cab, and turned away before the driver even pulled off. Elena watched the entire exchange from behind the bus stop awning. She didn't call out to him. She didn't need to. That night, back in her small apartment, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror. She looked at the scar, brushed her fingers along its edge. She didn't cry, but she did wonder for the first time in years if maybe someone could look at her and see more than pain. Maybe someone already had. It had been a long day, the kind of day where rude customers blurred together, where tips were thin and comments sharper than usual. Elena felt the exhaustion in her bones as she closed the register, rubbed the back of her neck, and grabbed her coat. Julian was waiting outside. She had seen him through the window, hands in his pockets, leaning against the lamppost like he had all the time in the world. When she stepped out, he straightened. "Rough day?" he asked. "You could say that," she replied, her voice flat. He hesitated, then offered gently, "There's this place down by the docks. They serve food that doesn't taste like cardboard and let you linger. Want to go?" Elena blinked, surprised. She opened her mouth to say no, out of habit, out of fear, but something in her softened, maybe because she was too tired to keep her walls up, or maybe because he wasn't pushing, just asking. She nodded. "Okay, but no pie talk tonight." Julian grinned. "Deal." The diner by the water was quiet, cozy, and dimly lit. Old jazz floated from unseen speakers. The wooden floor creaked under their steps. Elena felt her shoulders relax for the first time in days. They sat by a window, the dark river glimmering under scattered streetlights. Conversation came easier than she expected. They talked about books, the absurdity of elevator music, and the weirdest customer complaints she had ever gotten. Julian told her about his travels, not flashy, but detailed and thoughtful. He had a way of seeing beauty in small things, a tea cellar in Kyoto, a laughing child in Nairobi. a storm he once watched roll in over a wheat field. When the food came, they ate slowly, unhurried, and when the rain began to fall outside, soft and steady, they lingered a little longer. The drive back was quiet. Julian turned on a low instrumental playlist. Elena sat with her cheek against the window, eyes heavy. The rhythm of the car, the rain, the full belly, it all pulled her towards sleep. She dozed off, head turning gently to the side. Julian glanced over. Her hair had slipped behind her ear, revealing the scar in full. In the soft dashboard light, it was a gentle curve, not jarring, just there. A part of her, like a birthmark, etched by fire and survival. He did not look away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, delicate bloom, a flower she had once admired in passing. Purple, wild, lovely in its unpolished way. He placed it gently on her cheek, right over the scar. Not to cover it, but to frame it. When Elena stirred minutes later, she touched her face and found the flower. Confused, she turned to him. "You put this here?" Julian nodded, eyes still on the road. "I found it earlier, thought it belonged somewhere special." She held it between her fingers, brushing it lightly. "Why?" "There." He glanced at her, then back to the road. "Because it's a beautiful place, unique, unforgettable." Elena swallowed hard, staring down at the flower. He added softly, "Some people think scars are damage. I think they're stories. And that one, it tells the story of someone worth knowing." Silence settled between them, not awkward, not forced, just stillness. When they pulled up to her apartment, she didn't get out right away. She looked at him, really looked, and didn't turn away when his eyes met hers. This time, she didn't shield the scar, didn't shift her hair, she let it be seen. "I've spent a long time trying to hide this," she said quietly. Julian replied, "Maybe it's time to stop." She nodded. "Just once." And then she took the flower, tucked it behind her ear, and said, "Thank you. For dinner. And for seeing me." He smiled. "You're welcome, Elena." And for the first time in a long time, she stepped out of the car, not as a girl hiding her face, but as a woman walking forward, carrying her story in full view. Elena was refilling the sugar dispensers at the counter when her phone buzzed. She barely glanced at it, expecting a spam message or an update from the bakery supplier. But before she could check, her coworker Mia rushed over, eyes wide, holding out her phone like it was something radioactive. "Have you seen this?" Mia asked, voice pitched somewhere between panic and disbelief. Elena frowned and took the phone. On the screen was a gossip site she'd never visited in her life. Flashy fonts, flashy images, the usual scandal. But front and center, her. A bit blurry, slightly tilted, but there was no mistaking it. Her face. The scar. Her side profile lit by the soft golden glow of the dockside restaurant's lights. And beside her, laughing mid-sentence, was Julian Cross. The headline screamed across the top, "Billionaire in hiding? Julian Cross spotted dining with scarred waitress in downtown dive." The words blurred, then sharpened. Her blood turned to ice. She scrolled down, hands trembling. There were already hundreds of comments, some supportive, some curious, but many cruel. Words like charity case, pity date, and Beauty and the Beast leapt off the screen like knives. One comment read, "Guess even billionaires have a kink for damaged goods." Another, "Brave of him to go out with that, must be part of a PR campaign." Elena felt the air drain from the room. She dropped the phone onto the counter like it had burned her. She didn't finish her shift. She didn't even tell anyone she was leaving. She just grabbed her bag and walked out into the street, not caring that she had flour on her apron or coffee on her shoes. By the time she reached her apartment, her phone was buzzing non-stop. Notifications, texts, missed calls, even emails from reporters. She turned it off and tossed it on the couch, heart pounding. Her fingers went to her face out of instinct, brushing over the scar like it might have grown bigger in the last hour. It felt huge, it felt loud, it felt like it was suddenly all she was again. She sat at her kitchen table, in the dark, the only light coming from the flickering street lamp outside. The curtains were drawn. The world was too close, too loud. A knock at the door broke the silence. She froze. Another knock. Then a voice, low, gentle. "Elena? It's me." She stood, walked slowly to the door, and opened it. Julian stood there, his expression unreadable. Not in a suit, not smiling, just still. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. She let him in, but didn't speak, her arms crossed, her back tense. "You knew," she said finally, before he could say anything. "I didn't leak that, Elena. I swear." "No," she cut in, her voice sharp. "But you knew this could happen. You knew who you were, what you represented." Julian stepped forward, but she stepped back. "For you, it's just another Tuesday, another article, another spin. But for me, I just became a headline with a scar, a side note in your perfectly curated world." He shook his head, his voice low and steady. "You're not a headline. You're not a side note. You're the most real thing I've known in a long time." She looked at him, her throat tight. "Do you even understand what it's like? To be looked at not as a person but as an oddity? To have strangers decide whether your pain is inspiring or disgusting?" "I don't," Julian said. "But I want to. I want to understand. And I want to stand beside you while I learn." Elena's lip trembled. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be seen like this." "I know," he whispered, "but I saw you long before that photo, and I haven't stopped since." She looked away, blinking hard. I need space," she said quietly. Julian nodded. "I'll wait, for as long as it takes." He turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him like the end of a chapter she hadn't wanted to finish. Alone again, Elena sat down. She turned her phone back on and stared at the photo, not the headline, not the comments, just the moment, the way he looked at her, the way she had almost believed she could be loved. She turned off the screen again and leaned back into the silence, not knowing whether it hurt more to be remembered or forgotten. For days, the diner stood without her. Elena had turned in her apron without a word, left her final paycheck uncollected, and silenced her phone. She moved through the world like a ghost, unseen, unheard, and untethered. She did not reply to Julian's messages. She could not. Not because she was angry, but because she was afraid. Afraid of being defined by something she could never erase. Instead, she returned to a room she had locked long ago. It was the spare room in her small apartment, the one with the easel covered in a sheet, a dusty set of oil paints in a cracked box, and canvases stacked against the wall like forgotten memories. She uncovered the easel slowly, as if unwrapping a wound. The first brush stroke was awkward, the second hesitant, but then her hand began to remember, muscle and memory stirring back to life. She painted for hours, days, with no goal, no exhibition, no one watching, only colors and silence and the familiar rhythm of creation. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across the table, her younger brother Ben came to visit. Now in college, taller than her, but still the same gentle soul she'd pulled from the wreckage all those years ago. He walked in and stopped short, staring at the half-finished painting propped against the wall. "You're painting again," he said quietly. Elena nodded, not looking up. Ben sat beside her. "I missed this," she smiled faintly. "Me too." He picked up a brush, turning it in his fingers. Then he said, almost out of nowhere, "You know, you're the first person I ever trusted." Elena blinked. "What?" "That night," Ben continued, "when the car was smoking and everything was on fire, I didn't think anyone would get me out. But then I saw you, crawling through glass, not even thinking about yourself. I knew then I could always trust you." Elena froze. Her hand trembled. He looked at her, eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "You carried that scar for me. For us. And you never once made me feel like I was the reason your life changed." Tears welled before she could stop them. "You were a kid," she whispered. "So were you," Ben replied. "But you were the bravest person I've ever known." When he left, Elena stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. For years she had avoided this mirror, only glimpsed herself in pieces, never long enough to feel the weight of what she saw. Now she looked. Fully. The woman staring back had a face framed by quiet courage. The scar no longer screamed. It sat there, soft in the light, like a thread of silver stitched into a canvas. And for the first time, she did not turn away. For the first time, she thought, maybe this is not something to hide. Maybe this is where I begin. Elena did not need anyone to tell her she was beautiful. She had just told herself, and that was enough. The envelope sat on Julian's desk for hours before he opened it. It was plain, no return address, no logo, just his name written in neat, familiar handwriting, soft loops, careful strokes. Inside was a single piece of stationery, folded once. Julian unfolded it with care. Julian, thank you. Not just for seeing me, but for not looking away. I am sorry I disappeared. I needed to find out if I was still someone when no one was watching. I think now I am. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know. Elena. He read it twice, then folded it slowly, pressing it to his chest. A week later, the invitation arrived in Elena's mailbox. A community art exhibit hosted in the old railway station downtown. The email was simple. Someone had submitted her name, said her work mattered. She almost didn't go, but she did. The station had been transformed. White lights hung from the rafters, paintings and photographs arranged along brick walls and steel beams, children's drawings, abstract bursts of color, portraits full of soul. Elena walked through the space cautiously, her heart pounding. She had submitted a small piece, an oil painting of her brother as a boy, sitting at a kitchen table, smiling. She hadn't expected anyone to notice, but they had, and then, near the center of the space, she saw it, a large canvas, carefully framed, a portrait of her. It wasn't exact, not photorealistic, but the essence of her was there. The curve of her jaw, the way her hair fell, the tilt of her lips when she was caught between laughter and resistance. The scar was there too, but it did not dominate. It shimmered subtly, like a brushstroke made of light. Below the frame, a simple placard, Elena in Bloom, J.C. Her breath caught. She turned, and he was there. Julian stood just beyond the soft spotlight, not dressed like the CEO the headlines knew, but like the man who sat in a quiet diner every Thursday afternoon, hands in his coat pockets, eyes steady on hers. "I didn't know you'd come," she said, voice tight. "I hoped." They stood in silence, surrounded by whispers and footsteps, but their world was still. "You painted that?" she asked, nodding toward the portrait. He nodded. "Every night for a month. I wasn't trying to capture your face. I was trying to capture what I saw the day you put that flower behind your ear." Her eyes shimmered. "I saw a woman who had spent her life surviving," Julian said. But in that moment, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was blooming. Elena took a step closer. "You always see more than you're supposed to." Julian smiled. "Only when it matters." She looked at him, all the fear, distance, and time folding into something softer. "I never wanted to be someone's inspiration," she said quietly. "I just wanted to be someone." "You already were," he said. "Long before I met you." She bit her lip, fighting a smile. "You never stopped painting, did you?" "Not after I met you." A pause. Then he added, voice lower, "I used to think strength was about standing alone, building walls. But you taught me it's about letting someone in. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." Tears spilled freely now. Julian reached for her hand. "Elena," he whispered, "I've seen you powerful. I've seen you graceful. But right now, right here, you're the most radiant thing I've ever seen." She squeezed his fingers. "And you're still the man who brings pie just to talk." He laughed, and she stepped into his arms. This time she did not flinch when he touched her cheek. This time the scar was not in the way. It was a part of the moment. And this time, when they stood close, it was not about fixing each other. It was about choosing to stay. Morning light streamed gently through the windows of the small bakery, painting the tiled floor with soft gold. The sign above the entrance read "Scarlet and Kindness," its hand-painted letters warm and welcoming. Beneath it, a quieter message, where every story matters. Inside, the comforting scent of cinnamon and vanilla lingered in the air. Loaves of fresh bread cooled on wooden racks. Raspberry tarts glistened behind glass. The atmosphere felt more like a hug than a shop. Elena moved behind the counter, tying her apron with practiced ease. Her long braid rested over her shoulder, and the scar along her left cheek, once a source of shame, was no longer something she covered. It was simply part of her. Like the name above the door, born from pain, now a mark of resilience. Scarlet for the color she once hated, kindness for the one thing that had changed everything. Customers filtered in slowly, some for their daily coffee, others just to sit and breathe. Many came for the pastries but stayed for something deeper. Soft conversation, understanding smiles, a quiet sense of belonging. By the register sat a jar with a note. Pay it forward, for someone still finding their way. At the back of the bakery, near a sun-warmed window, Julian sat with a cup of tea and a notebook he rarely wrote in. He had helped Elena open the shop, investing quietly, never seeking recognition. This was her place, her healing. He was simply grateful to witness it bloom. That afternoon, the garden behind the shop came alive. Instead of a grand wedding, they had chosen something honest and small, a wooden table under hanging lights, wildflowers scattered across every surface, napkins tied with string. A homemade cake waited on the windowsill. Two children, Elena's younger brother and Julian's niece, raised glasses of milk and laughed like they owned the world. Elena wore a soft cream dress, flour still on her cheek from a last-minute batch of scones. A ring of daisies circled her head. She walked barefoot on the grass. Julian stood beside her, eyes bright. "I don't have a speech," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "No grand vows, just this." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a simple silver band, no jewel, no shimmer, just a word engraved on the inside. Whole. "I didn't fall in love with your scar," he said, looking into her eyes. "You were already beautiful, but that scar, it's a part of your story, and I love all of it. I love all of you." Elena's throat tightened. She didn't speak, she just nodded, smiling through tears, and that was enough. Later in the week, as sunlight poured across the bakery floor and the first customers wandered in, the front door creaked open again. A young girl stood there, hoodie pulled low, hands tucked deep in her pockets. A large birthmark covered her chin. Her eyes flickered toward Elena, then down at the Help Wanted sign taped to the glass. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I was wondering if you'd ever hire someone like me." Elena stepped forward slowly, smile warm and calm. She wiped her hands on her apron and knelt just enough to meet the girl's eyes. "In this place," she said gently, "we don't hire perfect. We welcome real. And real," she added, tapping her own scar with a wink, "is always beautiful." The girl blinked, then smiled for the first time in what looked like days. Outside, the city rushed forward, impatient, loud, unforgiving, but inside scarlet and kindness, time moved differently. Here, scars were honored, stories were safe, and love wasn't a fairy tale. It was bread in the oven, warm hands across the counter, and a place where healing began one sweet, imperfect morning at a time. Thank you for joining us for the story Waitress Gets Ridiculed Because of the Scar on Her Face, Then a Millionaire Appears and Changes Her Life. A journey of healing, quiet strength, and the kind of love that sees through everything. If this story touched your heart, made you tear up, or simply reminded you of the beauty in being truly seen, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here, every scar holds meaning. Every soul deserves peace, and every heart is worthy of love. We'll see you in the next story.